10, 9, ignition sequence start. All engines are running.
Liftoff, and the clock is starting.
The clock is operating. We're underway.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And with our helmets off, we move right into Kerbalcast, episode 21. We have cleared the tower.
Looks like you're looking at a four-jawed angry alligator.
I am your LMP, that's Lunar Module Pilot Biff Aldrin, and as always, our Command Module Pilot, CMP,
Nostromo.
Coming up in today's program, we'll update you on our progress within the game,
Dark Mushroom focuses on interplanetary transfers in this week's Dark Matters.
and we'll have your letters in this week's mission briefing.
DK brings us Modder's Minute.
And we have another Shade Challenge for you.
And after the credits, we talk about Apollo 7 and Voskhod 1.
Yeah, we've got a couple of anniversaries coming up for both of those.
Yeah.
So we're going to focus on the American and the Soviet space program. Well, let's go ahead and start out with obviously the most recent news. Have you checked? Update 0.25 is now out, and obviously it just came out, so we haven't really had a chance to get into it too much.
Yeah, at the time of this recording, we haven't had much time to play with it.
Right.
So
I've put a couple of hours in on it, and I mean, I'll talk about my first impressions a little bit, but in terms of like a full-blown review, let's save that for next week, because
Yeah.
I want to be fair and kind of get into it and kind of go with it. I will say I was fairly hard on 0.24. I am more impressed with 0.25. They answered one of my big complaints, I guess criticisms that I had about 0.24, which is I said that reputation and funding didn't really do much.
yeah.
Now that they've added the administration building and you're actually working towards something, it now means something.
Yeah, because I haven't messed with it at all, but I saw Miguel's video on it.
Right. Which was good, by the way.
Yeah, it was a good video. They lined out, it's like those things actually have a purpose, and now there's different strategies. So if you're like, well, I'm doing the situation I'm currently in is I'm not crazy rich with funds,
Right.
so I could go to a funding strategy and build up my funds, you know, and then once I have that, I can go back to a science strategy and start again science.
Right.
So it really balances like the things that I was afraid of being held back with from 0.24.
Well, and what I like is that, you know, some of those strategies you can only get to with a certain amount of funding or a certain amount of reputation.
Yeah.
Or, you know, so again, you have a target. You know, it now means something. And I also like that the difficulty setting is something you can mess with. You can really, it's 0.25 allows you to really customize the game. The minute you get comfortable with something and you may get bored, you can go in there and start tweaking some of the settings and have a different game. I have not done it yet where I can't do revert, you know, where I can't revert to launch and things.
Oh.
But I can imagine that, you know, when I actually do that for the first time, that's going to be a different beast.
Yeah.
That's going to be a whole different animal.
You can still F5 and F9. You just can't like revert to launch.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe. Like I said, in a week, I'll be better versed in it. But anyway, my initial impression is I am more impressed with 0.25 than I was with 0.24.
That's good.
The other thing, when we did our interview with Max Maps, remember, he said that there was a feature in there, not a hidden feature, but he said there was something in there that if you, what did he say? If you played the game right,
that most players wouldn't encounter it. Like most people who've been playing for a while, like wouldn't, you know, experience it.
Well, apparently it's destructible buildings.
Yeah.
Apparently you can like rain debris down and destroy buildings. And he showed it. He did the video we were talking about. He actually showed, you know, buildings exploding.
Yeah.
And
it was cool.
Yeah. It's cool, but apparently if you actually do it in the game, you can kiss your bank account goodbye.
Yeah.
So it'll be a little pricey. Well, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about progress. First of all, have you had a chance to?
I actually got in a pretty decent number of hours this time. I wasn't
really,
like, you know, doing like 30-minute or hour cramming.
Are you still on your 6-day work schedule?
Yes, I think.
Wow. And you did a lot of. I have to give you a lot of credit for that.
I managed to squeeze in some time. I have. I think I have one more week of it, and then it may settle down. Either way, I have vacation time to spend, so I'm going to get my time. So my progress, I've been trying to do the thing landing on the mun, landing on the mun and returning.
Right.
And I hadn't started rendezvous. I'm going to do that this week.
Okay.
But for the mun thing,
I'm here for you, baby. I can help you.
Yeah, we had a lot of letters about it, and like throughout the week,
About the lunar landings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, about helping with those, and so I'd been taking all that stuff to heart, and I think it's Christian.
Yeah, Christian M.
Yeah, Christian M. Actually sent pictures of the lander that they were using. So I actually I didn't have all of those parts, but I used some of those parts. And so I made a couple, and I realized, with that kind of lander, I can make some pretty cheap stuff, So I was like, okay, I can actually make a couple of these and not have to revert and actually give it a try. I did have some fuel issues. I wasn't using those same little engines. I had it's like 2 little side mount engines, the Roco Max somethings. I don't remember. I think they were thrust 160.
Okay.
And I had 2 of those, and I would try to this is something that I'd forgotten. And a couple of different people had said that you land, if you want to do it like that, you have your lander land on the mun, and then you leave it. You know, it's like you transfer all the science to the pod, and then you jettison the pod from that lander, and take off and head home.
Yeah, your ascent stage and your descent stage.
Yeah, and I completely forgot about leaving the thing behind, because that's what we did. I forgot about leaving the rig behind and just flying the capsule home. So that helped a lot.
Right.
Now with the engines that I had on there and the fuel consumption and everything, I still didn't have enough to make it home. But I eventually just got frustrated with trying to bring all that science home at 100%. That I just transmitted all of it. And I lost a lot of science that way.
Yeah.
But I was like, I would rather have this science to unlock the parts to get the things I need to do this mission how I want to successfully than to continue trying and failing and never get the stuff anyway.
Yeah.
So, here's another NOS question. So let's say I have a fuel tank.
Okay.
And it has 1,000 fuel in it.
Okay.
And you have, let's say you have 2 of those.
Okay.
One of them burns.
And when you say, and I just want to make sure I'm clear, when you say 1,000 fuel, you mean the mix, the 2 different. You're not talking about monopropellant. You're talking about the mixture, the fuel mixture.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Liquid fuel.
Gotcha. I'm with you.
You attach a booster that has a 50 thrust on one.
Okay.
And on the other one, you attach. Sorry, not a booster. You attach a engine that does 50 thrust on one.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
And on the other one, you do one that has 100 thrust.
Okay.
Would they travel the same distance? Just one would go faster, or does one consume fuel at a higher rate? Because the engines that Christian was using were small, and they were thrust, I think 75 or 50 or something like that.
Right.
The ones that I had were 160, and there were 2 of them. And I burned through that fuel so fast. It was almost like they were separatrons. So, but I was like, am I covering the same distance just really fast? Or do these things burn fuel at a higher rate? And so I'm just not making it last as long.
I don't know that I could answer that.
Okay, because what I'm wondering, in that 2-engine example, if they would both travel the same distance, by the time it ran out of fuel,
right,
just one would take longer to get there because it's half the speed.
Right.
Or if they would actually, the 51 actually consumes less fuel to get that much thrust.
Yeah.
And actually by the time they both ran out of fuel, the one that had 50 would go farther, tortoise in the hare,
Yeah.
Or if the one with more...
My experience has been that it varies engine to engine. I don't know enough about it to say much more than that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say something that turns out to be wrong.
Yeah, because the one that they showed had, the one in that picture, I used the same size fuel tank, I just had different engines.
Right.
And the way that they made it sound is like, oh yeah, it's plenty of fuel to get home. And so I was like, oh yeah, so I launched it, and it was just dry.
Let's throw this to the listeners. We would like to have some explanation, a little bit more information.
Yeah, I have 2 engines with the same amount of fuel.
Right.
And one has, but they have different amounts of thrust. Which one's going to be more fuel efficient?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're throwing that out to the listenership.
I
know they will answer.
Yeah. Other than that, I still have plenty of money to go back to the MUN and do that. There's not a lot of science there left for me, but I think I'm going to go anyway.
Right.
Just because I want to like successfully do that.
Okay.
So I'm going to try it one more time with those new engines I have, and then after that, I'm going to start working on Rendezvous.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I get a call at 3 a.m. and I hear sobbing noises,
yeah, that's definitely the Rendezvous call.
I will say it is Rendezvous early on is one of the most difficult things to learn. Once you learn it, then you won't have that problem again.
Yeah.
Because once you get it down, you're able to do it. The first time you do it, you're going to feel like it was just dumb luck. Mm-hmm. And trying to do it again, you will probably struggle, or at least I did. But once you finally get it down to where you almost intuitively understand it, then it's never a problem. You can rendezvous pretty much anywhere with anything.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's like riding a bike. I didn't learn how to till I was 20.
It's like riding a bike at 200 miles above the surface. Okay, so that's your progress?
Yep.
Okay, on to mine. You know that I gave up on the trying to fly from the cabin view experiment. Yeah. What's funny is that when I stopped doing that, it's almost like I went back to where I was before. Several podcasts ago, I had been working on, I'd been experimenting with docking hatches and grabbers. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the minute I stopped messing around with trying to fly in cabin view, I was right back to messing around with docking hatches and grabbers.
It's like you're in a bad relationship. You just rebound on it.
I just keep going back to it. Well, you know what's, you always talk about rollies and spinnies and swimmies and things. It took me forever to break this habit. When I went back to it, I kept saying grabbies. They're grabbers.
Yeah.
I kept going, okay, I'm going to put a grabby here. No, it's grabbers. So anyway, but I did that for a while. And, but we had talked about the fun factor, right? I had been experimenting for so long with cabin view. And then I went to where I was, okay, so now I'm back to experimenting with docking hatches and grabbies. And it was like, I'm not having fun. I'm back, it's like I went from one kind of experimenting to a different kind of experimenting. Mm-hmm. And so finally what I did was I said, you know what, I'm going to go back to basics. And I built a semi-simple rocket with a lander on it. And, got into orbit and went to the MUN and landed on the MUN and came back. And I did a very basic mission, but I had so much fun doing it because I got back to the play part.
Yeah.
If that's all I ever did was go to the MUN and land and come back, I would get bored with that, which is where me experimenting with, okay, I'm going to try these parts this way, or I'm going to build ships this way, or I'm going to, messing around and trying to kind of find the parameters of the game. That's where that comes into. Once I get satisfied with the basic play style, then I start to expand out and, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. But I can get too far away from the basic play.
Yeah.
And it's fun to go back to a simpler rocket and a simpler little lander. And it was like I was back to just flying and landing and it was like I was just back to basic play and just having a ball doing it.
Yeah. Like there's the Shea Challenge forever ago with where you would land little houses. Like you're just landing things on curb and surface. And like, that took me back to the days whenever I was like lucky to get a suborbital.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, I went into space and I'm coming back down. Am I going to land on something?
Yeah.
I'm going to crash into something. I may land on it too,
Yeah.
So it's like, it was just kind of fun to do that again because it's like, I know I'm able to do it. Mm-hmm. I was good enough at it. And now I just get to experience that. That's all that's all there is to it.
One thing I really enjoy doing, I still love to go to the Kerbal Space Program subreddit. And I love to see, because people are always posting on there I just started playing this game a month ago, and, here's my first landing, or here's my first whatever. And people still post that all the time. And they do screenshots and they do descriptions. And it always just tickles me because, there's that excitement.
Yeah.
And when you see stuff like that, you just feel like, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it's not like, yeah, we've been there. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's one of the nice things about the Kerbal community is that, when somebody gets on there and posts that, everybody gets on, everybody responds and says, hey, good for you. Keep going.
There's like the big quests and stuff that you'll have in RPGs, and every now and then you just want to do a little fetch quest. Yeah. You just want to run around. It's like, I'm just gonna have fun right now.
Well, that's like Elder Scrolls. I mean, sometimes you want to take a break from the main mission and just, hey, I found a cave. I'm gonna go kill gnomes.
I'm gonna walk around. It's like, oh, okay, Draugr, no big deal.
One thing I did do this past week that I had not done before, I used a different design on my my lander / orbiter than I had done before. Typically, when you separate your lander from your orbiter, land and then return, typically when you dock, you're generally docking the nose of your lander to the nose of your orbiter, or something to that effect. And generally, my experience has been when you do that, you end up with a fairly wobbly craft.
Yeah.
What I did instead was, those massive docking ports, the docking port senior. What I did was on the nose of my orbiter, I put one of those, and then on the underside of my lander, I put another one, a docking senior, but I flipped it to where it was pointing straight down. And my lander, it had a center tank, which was RCS, and then I had 4 Symmetry fuel tanks around it with engines on those, but there was no engine on the center tank, okay? And so what I did was when I detached and landed, when I came back up and rendezvoused, I actually rendezvoused in reverse. I backed up and I connected those 2 docking seniors together. And so my lander took its position at the head of the rocket as it had been coming out. And that's very stable. So, when I burned my orbiter and returned to Kerbin, it was with a very stable rocket.
Nice.
Anyway, I don't know if anyone's done that. But it was kind of one of those, it was just one of those moments where I was building the craft, and I just went, wait a minute, why do I always have to put the docking port on the nose? Why can't I, why can't I do it this way? And it actually worked out better than what I had been doing.
Yeah.
Because the other thing I would do a lot of times is I would put a docking port on the back end of the orbiter. And when the lander would come up, I would dock the nose of that to the back end of the orbiter. Well, again, you've got a wobbly craft.
Yeah, you have like a cone shape attaching to a flat surface.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Because the capsule is triangular shaped.
Yeah. And
when you connect on that very tip, what happens is that when you start to accelerate, because it's the sides of the capsule aren't touching anything, it tends to wobble. And whereas if you do the docking port senior and you butt those 2 up together, I mean, they're perfectly flat and attached, so they don't wobble. Anyway, well, let's go ahead and move on. Let's go ahead. It is last week. Unfortunately, we were not able to hear from Dark Mushroom, and the reason was, this week's Dark Matters, he wanted to really dig into it because interplanetary transfer is one of those things that is it's difficult to summarize. And he basically said, I'm going to take 2 weeks and really dig into this and really come up with an explanation. So here it is, Dark Mushroom, and this week's Dark Matters.
Passing in a Kerbalcast sphere of influence comes this week's installment of Dark Mushroom's Dark Matter. My name is Dark Mushroom, and at the request of Biff in the Kerbalcast community, I'd like to go over a few pointers on interplanetary transfer. Now, Before my words have our esteemed listenership of NASA engineers, squad devs, physics majors, and advanced Kerbalers jumping up and down in anger, I would like to caution that all maneuvers suggested in Dark Matters are designed to strike a balance between simplicity and efficiency. That being said, let's talk about traveling to nearby satellites. First, target the satellite you will be traveling to. Next, make a maneuver node at your ascending or descending node, marked with a small green AN or DN on your current orbit. At this maneuver, adjust normal or anti-normal using the purple triangle symbols until the nodes read 0.0 or NAN. This burn puts you on the same orbital plane as the satellite. Once complete, make a new maneuver node and plan a prograde burn until your projected apoapsis is at the same distance as the satellite, and, with a little adjustment in where the node lies, you should easily get an encounter. If you're heading out to a planet in higher orbit than Kerbin, wait until it's ahead of you. Imagine the solar system from the top down has a gigantic T shape on it. Kerbal, the sun, at the very bottom, and Kerbin at the top. The best time to leave is when your destination planet lies at the far left arm of the imaginary T. Though not perfectly efficient, I find it easiest to make one burn to get away from Kerbin's sphere of influence that roughly matches the target planet's orbit, then form your encounter from a second adjustment burn at the ascending or descending node along the way. Now, unfortunately, despite exhaustive research, there is no similar trick that I can find for getting into planets in a lower orbit. You want the target to be behind you, and you want to burn counter to your orbiting planet's direction of travel. For example, burning prograde on the sunny side of Kerbin if you're heading due east. These tidbits of advice, however, just don't provide a good frame for how far back the target planet should be before burning. So, I want to open Dark Matter's doors to all those brilliant people I mentioned earlier in my disclaimer. If you have a simple, general, reasonably fuel-efficient method for getting encounters with planets in a lower orbit, I will personally test it and make my findings, along with your name, the subject of next week's Dark Matter. As always, you can send in both questions and responses to this segment by tweeting me at darkmushroom87 on Twitter, or by emailing kerbalpodcast@gmail.com with the subject line Dark Matter. And remember, in the encouraging words of Lyndon B. Johnson, men who have worked together to reach the stars are not likely to descend together into the depths of war and desolation.
All right, once again, Dark Mushroom, this week's edition of Dark Matters. You do a great job. We certainly missed you last episode, but we're glad you're back. Well, let's move on to our mission briefing with your letters, and Nas has our first one.
Okay, we're going to start off with Cody C. Hello again, gents. Just wanted to first say very well done on another fantastic show. Thank you.
All right. I want to know, Cody, are you driving? Because you've told us about some of the, you listen to us while you drive and you have to pull over because you laugh.
I think he's a safe driver.
Okay.
Yeah, we intentionally became less funny to keep him safe.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yes. For everyone who thought we were less funny, it's not by accident.
It
was
safety.
On purpose. That's
for
right.
Safety.
Cody, you better be sitting in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven or NASA.
Yeah.
Okay? Don't drive. You know what? Friends, don't let friends drive and listen to Kerbalcast. Remember that.
Yeah, but let friends listen to Kerbalcast.
Well, no.
Actually,
what kind of a friend would let you listen to Kerbalcast?
Cody C's living big at NASA. He's got a chauffeur now.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's
he's
true.
Like, you know what? I really need to get out of this driving thing.
Edgar.
Yeah.
Edgar the chauffeur.
Yeah, getting his limo.
Another episode of Kerbalcast, my lord.
Of course.
Yes. And don't talk to me, you peasant.
Okay, back to Cody.
I'm Cody C, and I'm a big guy at NASA.
I am not sure if you are still...
Why aren't you doing it in my voice?
I'm not sure if you are still taking votes for But I Digress or not, but if so, please put me firmly in the pro column. As a quick example, no, it's not Europa Report. I was hesitant to see the film Gravity until I listened to your Digress segment on its deeper themes. After hearing your segment, I made it a point to see the film, and I found that I very much enjoyed it. Also, for likely obvious reasons, I love the segments on NASA and space exploration history and current space news and events.
Well, you're in for a treat today, Cody, because after the credits, we're going to be talking about Apollo 7 and also from the Soviet space program, Voskhod 1.
Yeah.
So
now, I wanted to take some time to offer Nas some tips that will hopefully help him master his Mun landing and return. He said, here we go. You already know that when you are in orbit around Kerbin at a given altitude, you burn retrograde to lower that altitude, and if you continue to burn, you will lower your altitude sufficiently to essentially run straight into the surface.
Which is what you were talking about last episode.
Yeah, and that's something I do a lot, is run into the surface. Now let's move to the surface of the Mun. If we switch to map mode and pretend that the Mun is our vehicle, we are essentially nothing more than a craft orbiting Kerbin at a constant altitude. So if we wanted to reduce our altitude, we should only need to burn retrograde, then fall back to the surface of Kerbin. So what this means is that when you are ready to lift off the surface of the Mun and return to Kerbin, the best and most efficient way to do this is to launch and burn backwards, retrograde, along the Mun's orbital path. If done so correctly, you'll be shocked at how little fuel is required to return to the surface of Kerbin from the Mun and Minmus. This technique removes the need to establish an orbit around the Mun before making your return burn to Kerbin, which is a massive fuel savings. Anyhow, I said I would try and keep things short. Mission failure. No, it's pretty succinct. So I hope this helps and is not too confusing. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know. Fly safe. Cody. All right, what do you got?
Okay, that's right. I've got the next letter. This comes from Chris Y. Hi, guys. Thanks for a great podcast. I really like what you've decided to do with Digress. I was wondering, how soon will you both adopt 0.25 when it's released? Will you continue in 0.24.2 for a while, or migrate your saves to 0.25, or even just start a new adventure from scratch in 0.25? And his sign-off? Shoot for the Mun! The answer to that, we are both on Steam, and so it updated automatically to 0.25.
Yeah, and so it's kind of like whenever 0.24 happened, everyone was either sandbox or science mode, and so now there's a contract mode. I'm pretty sure contracts is just going to get the new features. I don't know how much it's not going to really retroactively affect things, but the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to start over from scratch because everything I'm doing right now, like I don't have any hyper super important satellites or ships going to anywhere complicated.
Or people stranded on Eve.
Yeah, so I can...
Like I did.
I can just go back through, and I know how to get all the science that I needed from the beginning really quick, which gets me the parts to get, so basically I can fast track and recoup all the lost time really fast.
Right.
And I want to, every time the game is changed in a major way, I want to experience it from the ground up.
Right.
So I want to know what it'd be like if I was a new player just coming in. So yeah, I'll be starting a whole new contract mode and, be using the strategies and stuff. Not to mention, if I picked up with my contract mode now, I could miss out on all the funds and stuff I would have gained from having that the entire time. So
well, and also you can, now that the admin building is in, you can, you have some strategies now to consider.
Yeah, and
you can piddle with the difficulty settings.
Yeah, and the new space plane parts. Whenever I go to get science from around Kerbin, I'm going to fly there instead of launching rockets.
Right.
Because I just want to mess with the new space plane parts. So
yeah, I'm curious to see because my understanding is that it's going to enhance space plane.
Yeah. So
and that's something we haven't talked about much on the podcast, and that's because neither one of us really have a whole lot of experience with it.
We had that interview with the dude, and he lined out some good advice. So with the new parts, I think I'll try it. With the current parts, I have to unlock so much stuff. I'll be interested to see what parts of the new ones show up in what stages of science discovery.
And I want to see what kind of stock planes.
Oh yeah, stock planes would be cool too.
By the way, all the dude ever wanted was his rug back.
Yeah, they tied the room together.
That last letter was from Chris Y, and thank you very much, and hopefully we answered your questions.
Okay, Jamie T. There's a mod you can download called ScanSat that lets you build topographical maps of planets by scanning them from orbit.
You know what that's in reference to.
Yeah, because you didn't know the geography of the area you're landing in Roster Prop Monitor.
Yeah, we were talking about, I had... For those of you who did not hear last week's episode, I had been trying to land from cabin view and coming down on a slope and not realizing it.
Yeah.
And I had made the comment about it would be nice to have like a 3D topographical map of my landing area.
Yeah.
And that was in response to that.
Yeah, and I've actually seen it, and if I wanted... if there was I haven't done any mods yet, but that would be on my mod list because sending a probe just to scan the surface is really cool to me. You know,
Okay.
because it's like you would send probes first to planets, and then you try to send landers because, like manned craft, because at this moment there's not too many reasons you would send a probe to go explore a planet. So I mean, I would just might as well send a crew there because I
Right.
can get crew reports and EVAs and stuff. And
Right.
But if you're actually scanning the surface, yeah, I'd send probes. So ScanSat actually looks pretty interesting to me. So
Okay, our next letter comes from Crater. Hi, Biff and Nos. That'd be a good name for me, considering I left quite a few craters.
that's like your Top Gun name.
Yeah, my Top Gun
Yeah.
name.
Call sign.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, my Top Gun name is Gooseneck. Let's see. From Crater. Hi, Biff and Nos. First of all, I just want to say I love the show. I've been listening avidly for a couple of months now, and I look forward to each episode being released. I've been playing KSP since 0.15 several years now, and I'm very thankful that I bought it pre-Steam. So I have no way to know how many hours, days, weeks, months I've spent in game. I still wouldn't class myself as an advanced player, though. I've never landed on Moho, for example, or got back from the surface of Eve. Which that makes I'm curious. Have you landed on the surface of Eve and not been able to get back? Because you said I haven't gotten back from the surface of Eve.
Oh yeah.
Because Eve is kind of like the spacecraft graveyard.
Yeah.
It's like you don't land on Eve, you donate your spacecraft to it. Like, here you go. I'm apparently not using it anymore. He says, I have built space stations in Joule orbit just to admire the view. Remember, I told you, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
Joule orbit, I mean, that thing is just, that's part of the reason that I wanted to go there was just to look at the stupid thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to episode 19 and the problems you have with symmetry switching around in the VAB. This is for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you were having that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you know what? This is coming up here in the letter, but he actually has a piece of advice, a keyboard shortcut that I've been using all week since I read this letter. So anyway, that I've teased it. Now you have to sit there in suspense and wait.
Oh no.
Let's see. Once you know what it's doing, it does actually more or less make sense, and it's not too hard to work with. If you are on one-time symmetry, then that sticks. Always, totally, no problems. If you are on any other setting, and you mouse over a part that was placed with symmetry, then your current symmetry will jump to that of the part your mouse is over. Imagine that you have a rocket, and you place a radial decoupler with 2x symmetry. Now switch to 3x symmetry and place an SRB, solid rocket booster, onto the decoupler. If it didn't switch for you, then the one you place would be correctly attached to the decoupler, but the other two would be floating in midair around your rocket. It may be kind of Kerbal, but it won't help you go to space today. So that's why it does it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
No, it makes sense.
yeah, it's the game is saying, if you want this to actually work, this is what you need to do. So that's why it's switching on you. The best workaround is to get your mouse into the place you want the part, then use, here it is, here's your keyboard shortcut, X or Shift X to get the symmetry count to what you want it to
that
be.
means it forward and backward on
Yeah,
the...
X increases your symmetry, Shift X decreases.
Okay, I wondered because I've been hitting X to increase, but I was like, there's got to be some way to decrease.
Yeah. I have not been hitting Shift X simply because to me it's easier to just go around the horn.
Yeah.
And Crater has a sign off for us.
Okay.
You ready?
Go for it.
Keep launching.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's good. I like that one.
It was a directive. Crater, thank you very much for the letter and thanks for the tip. I seriously, I've been using that all week and it's been helpful. Do you have the next letter?
From Misha. Hey, Biff and Nos. So
Can I make a big deal about the pronunciation again?
We will soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Misha, Micah,
Mika.
Michelob.
Hey, Biff and Nos. So I finally caught up and, embarrassing cough, my first ever email to a podcast caused quite a stir, didn't it? But I digress. So thanks for taking my email as constructive criticism and not just as a whinge. However, by the time I got to episode 18 or maybe 17, when I was abruptly yanked out of my slumber, into which Biff's dulcet tones and the copious amount of beer I had consumed earlier that evening.
Wait a minute, read that again. Did you say I have dulcet tones?
Dulcet tones.
I'm sorry. Did you say that I had dulcet tones?
Ooh. Save it for after the credits.
Have I talked to you about orbital insertion? Now you just don't know where to go from that.
No. Had gently deposited me in by the mention of my name. Shout out to Nasir, actually pronounced it correctly. And you know what's funny? I don't remember how I pronounced it.
That's why I was trying to cover all your bases.
Yeah, it's one of them. I had all but forgotten about my outburst, and in fact had decided it wasn't really all that applicable anymore anyway, having raised it when I was up to episode 6 or thereabouts. Episode 6 is a big one.
Episode 6. You're the one. You're the one who's running up the download count.
It's the game changer. You see, I had taken your suggestion to heart by then, and usually simply skipped the But I Digress segment, enjoying the remainder of your awesome podcast. Mind you, that also meant it took me several podcasts before I became aware of Shay's challenge.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I think my comments were maybe a bit harsh, and having just listened to the latest episode, I'm glad you decided to keep But I Digress, but moved it to the very end for those of us who aren't keen on it. Personally, I'm looking forward to more stories about real missions, past and present. Ooh, we have something in store for you.
We are just plugging like crazy, aren't we?
Very much enjoy the Apollo 15 segment, as well as the books, movies, whatever, for your other fans. I still can't get over the amount of controversy I created, or the fact that my entire email was read out. Ahem.
Does it actually say ahem?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Aerodynamics. You had a bit of discussion about the nose cones and how useless they are in the current version of the game. I fully agree and was devastated when I found that out for myself. However, rather than continuing to build ugly rockets, I simply installed FAR, a mod by Ferrum 4. Currently, I'm using Near, again by Ferrum 4, instead, as my PC wasn't quite powerful enough for FAR, but both do a similar job. FAR, pun intended, more realistic aerodynamics. While I haven't really tried space planes for these mods, I can't land them for the life of my Kerbals, they make rocket launches so much better. If you decide to try these mods out, remember nose cones and fairings will start making a huge difference. Really, you will also need procedural fairings or a similar fairing mod, and pancake rockets won't really work anymore. Anyway, keep up the awesome work, guys. May you live long and keep boosting, or in Nas's case, rolling. Misha. P.S. I don't usually fall asleep to your podcast. Honest, it was the beer. In fact, it ended up taking me about 3 or 4 attempts to listen to all of that episode. It was just one of those weeks. I've had those weeks.
Well, I have to disagree with him.
What, it's easy to fall asleep to our podcast?
No, that I agree with. I mean, I've sometimes fall asleep recording it. So, those long stretches where I don't say anything. I'm catching up on the Z's.
It's like, hey, Nas, read a long letter. Go take a nap.
No, he said that he thought he was too harsh with what he said.
Nah.
I disagree.
Yeah.
That kind of commentary is what helps us the most. It helps us make this a better podcast, and it gave us a chance to toss a question out. What do you think? We got a lot of good responses, and we incorporated that into the program. And
yeah.
I think that the podcast gets better and better. We're much more focused on Kerbal. It's difficult for you and I, as I've said, to have a conversation without going off on some wild tangent.
Yeah.
But we're more focused. We're more focused on Kerbal. We have kept the digression segment, but we've moved it to the end so that people are not missing the Shay Challenge.
Uh-huh.
I think every listener comment, whether it's praise or constructive criticism, helps us. And I didn't think that was harsh at all.
Yeah.
I thought that was very well done and very constructive.
I mean, in the spirit of critique, I mean, it's the intention of the person giving it and the person hearing it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if both of them are meant to make something better, instead of just, completely,
you guys suck.
Yeah, completely voicing like disdain for it. It's like, well, if you don't like it, don't listen.
Right.
If you like it and you just want it to be better, then it's also kind of, good of us to at least, humor any suggestion.
Right. Absolutely. Well, it's, when somebody writes in with praise that tells us that what we're doing is that what they're praising, we're obviously doing well. When somebody writes in with constructive criticism, that tells us that there's room for improvement.
Yeah, like reframing.
Yeah. And so I just want to say, I don't ever feel like constructive criticism is too harsh, because it really helps us.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that episode 42 will sound much better than episode 21.
Yeah.
Which, ironically, episode 21, we're half the way to the ultimate answer.
Oh, yeah.
See?
But
42.
Just old enough to drink. In America.
There you go. Now we just have to figure out what the question was. I have the next letter. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. This one comes from frequent contributor North Star. Dear Kerbalcast team, as always, another excellent and enjoyable episode. I wanted to send in my appreciation of your decision to move after I digress, but I digress, to the end of the podcast and rename it after the credits. I hope it will work well for the program into the future. Based on the responses we're getting, I think so.
Yeah, so far so good.
From what we've heard, they're glad we kept it. And they're glad we pushed it to the very end, so that those who don't want to listen can skip. And those who do want to listen, there it is. Okay, back to North Star. I also thought I might be of help to Nos with the difficulty he's having in getting to the Mun and back. It seems the trouble he's having is related to two things. First of all, his cost-effectiveness of getting mass into Kerbin orbit in the first place. And second of all, the mission plan he is choosing to get to the Mun and back, which is greatly increasing the required mass. Regarding the first of these difficulties, I highly recommend that Nos attempts to lift his Mun mission to orbit using multiple smaller lifters. This will mean making use of orbital rendezvous and docking of different mission components to each other, but will allow him to rely heavily on SRBs, solid rocket boosters, to bring down costs. You said you're about to start working on rendezvous and dock anyway, so that would be well timed. For inspiration, I suggest Nos try launching his entire mission craft on top of lifters, utilizing 3 to 4 of the longer solid rocket boosters under a tri or quad coupler. By launching the mission craft in multiple pieces, one for the lander, one for the command craft, and one for fuel to refuel the other two, and using the lander command module engines to finish circularizing their orbits, this should be perfectly possible in no more than 3 to 4 launches. Of course, Nos will need to get the hang of docking and rendezvous first. Again, letter from North Star, and thank you very much. That's good advice.
Yeah. Thanks,
so
North Star.
what do you have?
From Michael L. Hey guys, I'm a big fan of KSP and your podcast. I heard you say you liked learning about the history of space travel, as I imagine most people who play KSP do, and I thought I'd recommend another podcast for you. The Space Rocket History podcast by Michael Annis is great for that kind of stuff. He's got something like 80 episodes, starting at the history of the rocket engine, explaining all different aspects of almost every American and Russian mission in chronological order, and he's only up to the Gemini missions currently, so you can imagine how in-depth it gets.
Oh, wow.
Playing KSP really renewed my interest in all things space, and between that podcast and yours, I've always got something interesting to listen to in the car. Keep up the good work. From Mike in Tennessee.
Okay, next letter. This comes from FIT Orion, and he says, hello. Regarding going to the Mun and returning, you got lots of response on this, didn't you? We launch east from the equator of Kerbin and gain a speed boost from that. Likewise for landing on the Mun. You want to be in an equatorial orbit and orbiting in the same direction as the Mun is rotating. Don't be afraid of stages. My Mun rockets often take 2 stages to reach Kerbin orbit. I tend to over-design a bit, so my transfer to Mun orbit stage tends to also be used to deorbit me for landing. Sometimes I'll have to jettison it with fuel still in it, so my nice lander with legs can land on those legs. It does not take much to get back off the Mun and back to Kerbin. Focus on beefing up your transfer stage, and your lander should then be able to be smaller and arrive on the surface with most of its fuel. That letter from FIT Orion. And thank you very much. Good advice for Nas. What's our next letter?
This one is from Skyzar.
Hail, Skyzar!
Hello and hail. As some listeners may know,
hail, Skyzar again!
The default screenshot location for KSP and Linux was changed recently, and this seems to have resulted in the loss of all of my screenshots from before version 0.23.5. While reminiscing about past failures, I came to realize that all of my favorite missions were rescues, mainly rescuing the situation rather than rescuing a Kerbal. Now the thing is, I never used to make much use of F5 or F9, mainly because I just kind of forgot about them. Me too. But since contracts came along, I've been using them all the time, and I thought to myself, if I just use the F9 key a bit less, I'd probably have a lot more fun with this game. I'd been thinking this while I had a lander orbiting the Mun looking for a landing spot. I had designed a lander to be as wide as possible to survive a landing on very rough terrain. It was a capsule with 4 girders coming from it to small tanks and the smallest engines. I had a separate descent stage and a return to Kerbin stage that was left in orbit. So taking a deep swig of my chocolatey moho, I moved my hands to the keyboard and accidentally caught the spacebar, just sitting my descent stage of my lander. We'll land anyway. You never know, we might have enough fuel to get home. Well, Jeb landed just great. He had some fuel left over, though not enough to get back into orbit. Still on the mission, and we'll rescue him later. EVA first. But what's this? Capsule door obstructed. Here's an interesting fact. The spaceship is built around the Kerbal. Jeb cannot get out of the capsule to be rescued. The only solution I can come up with in the few bad-tempered seconds I have allowed myself is to take off and crash to knock off the obstructions that are not allowing him to exit the capsule. Actually, I've had that where there's been pieces on there. Yeah. And
you roll around and knock them off.
Yeah, you just you shave them off. I just hitting the dirt. Jeb lifts off the Mun and flies into the ground at a gentle angle and crashes for a moment in a terrifying fireball, only to emerge triumphant as the capsule survives and Jeb climbs out with a great big grin on his green little face. And so the rescue ship arrives and lands about 4 kilometers from Jeb. He runs toward it, but it soon becomes apparent that it will take an age for Jeb to cover that distance. So we should move the rescue lander closer to him.
I was trying to do sound effects, and I instead sounded like I was doing a beat poem.
After much overcorrection, we make a bouncy landing 2 kilometers from Jeb and decide that's good enough, and Jeb runs toward it, soon passing his crashed ship again. After an age, the rescue ship comes into view. Ah, what a feeling. Soon Jeb has climbed aboard, and we waste no time in taking off, only then realizing that we haven't actually done any science. Well, at least you made it.
Yeah.
But we didn't get far. Before we reached orbit, the engines cough and sputter, out of fuel. I can't believe all the fuel is gone already. Jeb and Bob are wondering if they have any time left for any last snacks before hurling to a fiery doom. Clicking on the resources button, I see what I have fuel left to work with, and I discover I have loads left. After a moment of head scratching, I noticed that I didn't actually put fuel pipes connecting the central fuel tank and the small outer ones. So I quickly do a fuel transfer, forgetting that the engines are throttled up, speeding the ship into a wild tumble. So I quickly throttle down, wrestle back control, and transfer the fuel into 2 opposite tanks, then burn for all I'm worth, reversing the death plunge just a few hundred meters from the surface of the Mun. After powering up to orbit, I fill all the small tanks and head back to Kerbin. Then it's all just plain sailing, break into Kerbin orbit, deorbit, and fiery re-entry. I wonder if any of your regular listeners can guess what happened next. Well, they'd be wrong because I had parachutes. They did it open, they just didn't fly off. The ship floated down to safety and amongst some lovely mountains. I hit the recover button with a feeling of triumph, definitely one of my favorite missions, and it's all because I didn't hit F9. And that's the point of the story. Think twice before you stab that F9 key. You could be missing out on half the fun of the game. Remember, with enough courage and stupidity, we can overcome any obstacle, even our own incompetence. Ta-ta for now, Skyzar.
Hail, Skyzar.
That's a good story.
You know, I've said this in the past. Some of the most fun missions I've ever had have been the ones where I have, barely enough fuel or barely enough ship or whatever.
Did not go as planned.
Yeah, and you pull off these miraculous landings. So I know exactly what he's talking about. Sometimes it's more fun to, try to ride the smoking crater of your, what's left of your ship all the way down than it is to F9 back to a perfect ship and try it again.
Yeah.
So I want to do my beat poem. Green on the surface, he walks, stranded. But then he's rescued. Green is free. What do you think? I'm Jack Kerbenwhack.
Yeah. No.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Huh? Okay, next letter. This is the one you were talking about earlier. This is from Christian M. Hey, guys, new listener here, enjoying your podcast so far. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Yeah. On the last episode, Nos was talking about the difficulties he had returning from the Mun. They love you, man.
Yeah, well, it's like most of our listeners are pretty advanced players.
Yeah.
So this is something they know really well.
Right.
So yeah, I appreciate all the help I can get. So.
They've taken you under their wing.
Yeah.
You're their little brother. Let's see. I had the same issue once, and I thought I would share with you how I got over it eventually. I love that, eventually.
Yeah.
I got over it eventually. It is a good idea to design a dedicated Kerbal return stage and make it as small and simple as possible. I experimented with how small that stage can be, and it turns out, had I overestimated it by a wide margin. I realized I kept failing since I had been building way too large, complicated landers that ran out of fuel on their way there. All you need to return an Mk1 command pod from the surface of the Mun back to Kerbin is a single FL-T200 fuel tank and 2 tiny Rockomax 2477 radial engines. Alternately, you can use the LV909 if you haven't unlocked them. I have been successfully using that return stage on top of every Mooner lander since. You launch it from the Mooner surface, leaving your large descent stage behind. You don't go into Mooner orbit. You launch straight into a Mooner escape trajectory and end up in a highly eccentric Kerbin orbit. From there, it's just a nudge to get your re-entry. You should even have fuel to spare. I found that the Apollo flight profile is not efficient in KSP, since the hardware required, RCS, docking ports, extra engines, adds more weight and offsets the fuel you save. It's also more risky and more difficult. Hope that helps. P.S. As for the question of the direction of landing, it doesn't make a difference whether you land on the leading or trailing side of the Mun. You are in the frame of the reference. You are being in the frame of reference of the Mun at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Christian M.
Actually, Christian, you sent that picture, and I based my lander off of that. And that I was using the LV909s, and those are the ones that they ate the fuel so fast.
Right.
So I'm going to work on it some more, but yeah, that helped a lot.
Good.
It did.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really like is that anytime you and I have a question or get stuck,
yeah,
I mean, we have this massive resource that we can just, as long as we don't mind waiting a week.
Yeah, I think anytime I start a new game and I'm stuck, I'll just make a podcast about it. Some guy will find me like, "This is how you do it." And I'm like, "Okay, cool."
Nos plays Happy Happy Kitty.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'm stuck on the first level. How do I get past the barking dog?
So Ron K. Hey guys, I'm a listener in the Canadian Arctic. I have been downloading your podcast for the past 2, 3, 4 months, so almost since the beginning. I really am enjoying hearing about your adventures discovering the game. I've been playing since late January 2014, so approximately 9 months. So far, I've managed to land Kerbals on the Mun, Minmus, Duna, Ike, and Gilly. I have not been brave enough to try landing on Eve yet. I can't blame you.
Yeah.
I have also sent landers to Eve and probes to Jool. I've found that atomic engines are a great help in reaching the other planets. I have also recently started making space planes, and I think you should talk about those a bit.
This is where he sent us the picture of his space plane, is that right?
It didn't say it in this email, but I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because we tweeted that.
Yeah, we tweeted him out. Yeah, if you want to take a look at his pictures of his space plane, we tweeted those out.
The design challenges are different, the launch profile is different, and then if you are successful, you have to figure out re-entry and landing. My own space planes are generally just copies of ones I've seen on the forums, such as the attached. I have installed Spaceplane Plus in anticipation of version 0.25. I crash a lot, but I find it very interesting designing the planes and trying to make the physics of flight work. To be honest, I still crash a lot while trying to land on Kerbin, but that is just part of the challenge. In terms of thinking about the practicality of building a space plane, you have both complained about running out of money in the contract game. Imagine being able to run several rescue a Kerbal in orbit missions, but only have to pay for the cost of fuel. Anyway, happy landings. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that part, because you can recover the entire craft, so you get all your money back.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, so rescuing the Kerbal from orbit was probably a lot easier. So
good point.
Yeah, so in
wow.
Yeah, 0.25, I'm going to be doing a lot of spaceplane stuff, and I still have a Kerbal that's been in orbit since 0.24 started, and he's enjoying the ride, but I think it's about time to bring him home. So
you know what? I want a signed document from him saying that he's enjoying the ride, because I don't know if I believe you.
I'm gonna have to work on my forgery.
Yeah, he's up there with his face pressed against the window.
Yeah.
I want to go home. Okay, our next letter, and this is my last one. Hey guys, it's Ironsides. It's been a while. Last time I wrote, it was episode 12. At that time, I had 860 hours on KSP. Well, now I'm at 1,080. Wow.
Man.
Yeah. I have been super creative and made a lot of really cool stuff, and I want to thank the people on Steam for all of their positive feedback. Again, Kerbal community, we's nice, folks. You guys are still my favorite podcast. Oh, thank you. It makes working in the hot sun much easier. I like the new changes you made last episode, although I always listen to the whole podcast. My only suggestion is you make it about 10 hours long each week so I could listen all day. If this was 10 hours long, we would no longer be his favorite podcast.
Yeah, because we just do unedited, and you realize how much you really don't want to hear us say.
Oh, that's what we're going to do. Ironsides, we are going to send you a copy of the unedited version of this podcast.
Good luck.
You will be begging us.
Yeah.
You'll be like sending us money going, please don't ever, ever do that to us again. The story about telling your parents about KSP was great. I talk to my dad about the game all the time. He's always been into space and history in general, and I have inherited that from him. It's been a great bonding thing for us. That's really cool.
Yeah, that is
I like
cool.
that. Did you ever see the movie City Slickers?
A long time ago.
They have this may sound off the topic, but trust me, I'm going to circle it back around. There's a bit of dialogue in there that's kind of always stuck with me since I've seen it. The girls on the trip are saying to the guys, why is it that every guy can talk about baseball? What is it with you guys? And one of the guys said, when I was a teenager and I was fighting with my parents all the time, my dad and I could always talk baseball.
Yeah.
And it was that got us through. And, when I hear something like this, and it doesn't have to be Kerbal, but it's nice to have, that there are things out there that can still bridge the gap.
Yeah. Actually, they talked about in Teenage Wasteland that, usually parents had an easier time with, their kids that were in sports and stuff because sports don't change.
Right.
Like minor rules changes here and there, but football is football, and soccer is soccer. Or if you're on the other side of the world, football is football, and football is football.
Yeah.
and like those things are always like that.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to connect across generations because that's a constant.
And if there's turmoil, that's safe ground. That's safe ground that you can go to and have a conversation without wanting to kill each other.
Yeah.
Okay, continuing with Ironside's letter. For Mr. Nostromo, in regards to the problem with attaching struts and the clickable part being underneath the surface of the solid boosters. Remember, you were talking about having a problem with that. If you're intending to run the struts to your central tank or part, try running it from that central part first, then to the boosters. Now, you may be thinking, but Ironsides, the camera angle for that is not possible. Well, imagine that from the origin point, wherever you click, an invisible line going to your pointer. Whenever you make that second click, the strut will draw itself in a straight line and make the connection to the first solid thing it touches. Using this logic, you can spin the camera and click on the outer side of the boosters, and they will connect as soon as they hit the inside. With a little practice, you'll be able to put struts absolutely anywhere you want with near 100% precision. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I've never done that. I'm so glad my sign-off has kind of started a thing, so I'll stick with it. May you always have a star to steer by and enough fuel to get you home. Ironsides, thank you, and thanks for starting the thing.
Okay, last letter from Anykey. Fuel efficiency. I heard that Nos was having trouble with running out of fuel, so I had some ideas that might help him. Keep your periapsis from Kerbin as low as possible and your encounter distance with target as low also, about 10,000 with Mun Minmus. For these small bodies, the direction doesn't matter since they are not spinning very fast. More important is to land where you can see what's going on, so sunny side is usually easier. When you're going to actually land, you want to start as low and slow as possible, low periapsis and apoapsis. Keep slowing down horizontal movement until you're about 1 to 2K above the ground, and then start with vertical descent. Other ideas include don't bring everything with you, and don't bring everything back. Unless you're doing docking, you probably don't need RCS, and for these small bodies, use smallest engines you can find. For the return trip, discard everything after it's been used, extracting all the science from the experiments, and storing the data with the Kerbal. You only really need a Kerbal and a command capsule with a parachute, or even drop the capsule and just use a chair with a parachute instead. From Anykey, may you always have enough fuel to return home safe.
I have a question.
Yeah.
He's talking about landing, and he says that it's easier to land on the sunny side. By definition, wouldn't it be easier to land over easy?
No, egg humor.
But exactly.
Oh. So DK has a segment called Modder's Minute.
I'm pretty sure nearly all of us have sent out a science gathering mission and then came back with only a fraction of what we could have possibly gotten. It's really hard to know when we are able to gather some science that we haven't already done, or when we cross a biome barrier and have a whole new slew of experiments to do. The stock game gives precisely zero feedback with this. This is where Science Alert comes in. We get a visual and audio cue whenever a new science experiment is available. You can also configure the mod to stop time warp with the alarms. If you combine that with something like the GraphMax negative gravioli detector, you're going to be racking in so much science it will feel like cheating. Now sometimes it can be a little troublesome to have Science Alert stop time warp for every little experiment. Well, you can set up a science threshold to ignore lower value reports. There's another feature in the mod that I just love. In addition to having an alert pop up telling you which experiments you are able to do, it also gives you buttons to perform the experiments right on the interface. Sometimes it can be annoying to try to find that last seismic accelerator that you haven't used yet. With Science Alert, you don't have to. I think Science Alert is an absolute necessity for any career or science mode playthrough. It will make all of your missions much more efficient and save you a lot of time.
All right, DK, thank you much. That's DK with this week's Modder's Minute. We do appreciate all that he does for us. Good job.
Yeah.
Don't forget, you can check out DK on Twitch TV, either Declarations, that's DK Lorations, or he's also on KSP TV on Thursday evenings. So again, DK, thank you so much.
Okay, it's now time for the Shay Challenge. This challenge is another Easter egg hunt. On Kerbin, there are many strange things hidden within the mountains. I want you to find this anomaly and send back evidence. Another is the List Temple of King Jebediah the Fiery. Good luck and happy hunting. Oh, and don't forget the snacks.
Okay, question. This stuff is really in the game?
I guess so. Yeah, so I want to see the evidence too. If you want to show them the evidence, you can email us, kerbalpodcast@gmail.com, or you can put it on our Twitter at Kerbalcast.
You know, I just realized Shay has an incredible amount of power in his hands.
Yeah.
He could make up stuff that isn't true and, you know, like have us spend hours.
Yeah. It's
you
like
know?
There's nothing there.
Yeah. It's like, go deep in the cave and find the one ring.
Yeah. I swear it's there. Keep looking.
I call it my precious.
So does that wrap up everything?
I guess so. As always, if you want to get in touch with us, our email address is kerbalpodcast@gmail.com.
Okay, you can also reach us on Twitter at Kerbalcast, and you can download episodes directly from kerbalpodcast.libsyn.com, or you can subscribe to us on iTunes.
And we would like to toss out some thanks. First of all, to our listeners, thank you so much. You make this all possible.
Yeah.
And our regular contributors, as I said again, DK, Dark Mushroom, and Shay Byram, who, of course, gives us our Shay Challenge every week.
We also want to thank Squad. Without you, we really wouldn't have much to talk about on Kerbalcast. So thank you for the game. We also want to thank the subreddit moderators at KSP and Kerbal Academy. And all the music you've heard is from Professor Soap. You can find him at facebook.com/Professor Soap.
And in honor of the letter that we got earlier from Ironsides, may you always have a star to steer by and enough fuel to get you home. I am your LMP, that's Lunar Module Pilot Biff Aldrin, and our CMP, Command Module Pilot,
Nostromo.
As always,
Happy Kerbaling.
Thanks for sticking around. It's time for After the Credits.
Today we are going to talk, as advertised, about a couple of space missions from history. The first one we'll talk about is Apollo 7, which happened on October the 11th, 1968, so 46 years ago. And then the next one we're going to talk about was the Soviet spacecraft, Voskhod 1, which launched on October the 12th of 1964. So that is our 50-year anniversary. Let's start out with Apollo 7.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting. We are go for Apollo 7 at this time.
It was a 3-man mission, and the name, the crew members:
Walter M. Schirra, Don F. Isley, and R. Walter Cunningham.
21 seconds and counting. We have completed our power transfer. The Saturn 1B launch vehicle, which now weighs 1.3 million pounds, is ready to go. Coming up on the 10-second mark. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. We have ignition. Commit liftoff. We have liftoff. This is launch control. We have cleared the tower.
I watched on YouTube, you can just search Apollo 7, and they have like the old NASA films. And
those are great.
Yeah, those are always just so much fun. But yeah, it's like the old announcer and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like a 15-minute film.
Yeah.
This was like it was the first live broadcast one. And
it's the first live TV broadcast from an American spacecraft.
Yeah.
Hey, we got you. I can see Isley talking there. Hey, Don, turn your head to the right. There you go. Hey, you're picking up. I can read it now. Just a minute. It says from that lovely Apollo something. You guys should write high atop something. Looks good. I can see Wally Hamlet now, and Don has a smile on his face, and there's Walt. The definition is pretty good down here. I can see the center hatch. Actually, I'm amazed. It looks real good.
They try to portray it like everything went perfect, but there's some times where you're like, wait, what? You know, because they're like, whenever their launch was delayed, I think it was like anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And they just said, just some tension between the crew and ground controllers and stuff. You're like, with what?
There was a spot of bother.
Yeah. It's like, a little something happened, and you're like, wait, what was going on? One thing that was cool is like I got to see Gemini 6.
Right.
And you
got to see the actual craft.
Yeah, I got to see the actual craft, and it is cramped.
Yeah,
like there, not much room to wiggle around. Like they had mirrors set up so you could look around corners and stuff because you couldn't move your head. Yeah,
imagine being stuffed in that for like 7 or 8 days.
Yeah, they did the live
or 11.
Feed. They did the live feed on this one, and they said that there was more room than there really ever had been. Like they were able to move around each other and actually like. Experience zero-G actually floating and stuff.
Well, the term relative applies there.
Yeah.
There's relatively more room. And, they also, the kind of cool thing about the live broadcasts and stuff is, and I mean, they still do this today. They're like, hey, this is how we mix our drink or whatever. And they just spin it and they show you all these cool things about being in zero-G because you may not, know what RCS stands for. You may not know, like a orbital, how to set up an orbit or anything, but that zero gravity is cool. So, that's something they'll always show the public. Right.
Until space flight becomes commonplace amongst common people, it's always kind of cool to show them zero gravity.
Right. Well, you talk about tension. There was tension later in the mission too.
Oh, I love
which the NASA documentary that we both watched, the official NASA documentary, basically just smooths it over. As a matter of fact, they don't even mention the fact that there was what has been historically now called the mutiny in space.
Yeah, it was. The way they said it's like, one of them contracted a cold and it quickly moved to the rest of the crew, and so they decided to, implement a plan on reentry to equalize the pressure in their eardrums and stuff.
Right.
And it's like, that's not exactly how it happened. From what you were telling me, like, you know, Chirag, he got a cold. He got it was a head cold, right? Just
Yeah, he got a head cold.
Yeah, and that kind of...
And then it spread.
Yeah, because you're in this little box together, so it's going to move, you know?
Right.
And so, you know, they kind of had a dispute telling him, it's like, well, you got to keep your helmet on reentry. And he's like, I'm not going to keep my helmet on.
Yeah.
He's like, because I constantly need to be, you know...
Honking my nose.
Yeah, honking my nose to get my ear pressure settled. And I said, well, it's for safety. And he's like, well, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, and Deke Slayton, who was one of the Mercury astronauts, but he had been grounded as well. He was, you know, he was the bigwig there, and he actually got on the radio circuit and was telling them, you know, if you guys keep disobeying, you're going to have to explain yourselves down here on the ground.
Yeah.
And Shira was like, well, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like SAS in space.
Yeah. The thing is, I could not find audio for this.
I don't know if they'd want to admit that, you know, something like that went around.
Well, that's why I was hoping for, because a lot of the missions have, you can listen to complete audio start to finish.
The transcripts.
And I was trying to find that. And anyway, so the one downside to the mutiny story, this was Wally Schirra's last flight. And he announced that before they even went up. You know, he said, you know, I've flown them all now, so I'm going to retire. Well, he was the one that was basically mutinying. He was the one that was saying, you know, we're not going to do that and whatever. NASA couldn't punish him.
Yeah, they didn't have leverage on him.
Yeah, because he was retiring. So what they did was they basically grounded the other two astronauts.
Yeah.
The other two astronauts got punished for the quote unquote mutiny in space. One last thing we should mention about Apollo 7. The Apollo profile, the flight profile, called for later missions to have the command and service module separate, flip around, dock with the limb, and then extract it. Well, they didn't have the limb with them on this mission, but they simulated that maneuver anyway using the S-4B. And they got fairly close to it, but they also found that some of the adapter panels had not opened fully, and that's where the whole term about it looks like an angry alligator came from.
Apollo 7 Houston, how close are you now?
We're close to about 70 feet. It's tumbling rather wildly, so we're trying to stay away from it.
Roger, understand.
Copy, Jacko. The small panel on the opposite side of one large sphere sticking out by the engine does not have a flashing light. The other three are working fine.
Roger, copy.
Just to wrap up, Apollo 7 was a C-type mission, 11 days in space. It was an Earth orbital test flight. It launched on October the 11th, and it splashed down on October the 22nd, 1968.
This is Apollo Control Houston. Now, Recovery 1 has established electronic communication with Apollo 7. Recovery 1 has positive contact, and now we got the picture.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next one. October the 12th, 1964, Voskhod 1. From the Wikipedia page, this was the 7th manned Soviet spaceflight, and it achieved a number of firsts in the history of manned spaceflight. Number 1, being the first spaceflight to carry more than one crewman into orbit. The Soviet Union beat the American Gemini program by just a very short period of time. They had 3 people on board. They were the first flight without the use of spacesuits, the first to carry either an engineer or a physician into outer space, and they also set a manned spacecraft altitude record of 209 miles. Now, the bit about no spacesuits, in order to fit 3 people in there, they were not able to wear spacesuits. They couldn't wear space helmets. If anything had gone wrong, they basically would have been dead. There was no emergency escape system.
Flying clown cars, sounds like.
Well, it was basically, in order to accomplish the mission, it was as long as everything works, you guys are okay.
Yeah.
But, if anything goes wrong, it's nice.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice knowing you. From the Earth to the Moon is based on a book called Man on the Moon by Andrew Chaikin.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Chaikin is one of the go-to space historians, especially when you're talking about NASA and Apollo. There is a lecture series that he gave, and they are available on YouTube. And this is a short excerpt from it. Again, it's Andrew Chaikin, the author, and this is him talking about the Voskhod mission.
However, before Gemini could even get off the ground with astronauts, the Soviets scored another first and upstaged Gemini. On October 12th of 1964, they launched a spacecraft that they called Voskhod. Voskhod is the Russian word for sunrise. And Voskhod 1, we were told, was carrying not one cosmonaut, not even two like Gemini would, but 3 cosmonauts in orbit for a day before they landed back in the Soviet Union. And of course, we in the West had no idea of the details of Voskhod. We were only left to speculate. Everybody assumed it must be a very massive ship to carry 30 people. It was only many years later that details began to come out that in fact Voskhod was a converted Vostok. And you can see the diagrams on the upper right there. Vostok with its spherical descent module, the crew cabin, with 1 cosmonaut in his ejection seat. And on the right, the same cabin had been refitted. They took away the ejection seat because that was took up too much space and too much weight. They gave the 3 cosmonauts relatively lightweight couches, arranged very cramped in that spherical descent module. You can see it's basically the same vehicle. You can see the instrument panel on the lower right. There's a photo of the actual Voskhod 1 spacecraft that's on display at a museum in Moscow. You can see in the back there the porthole in the instrument panel that in Vostok the cosmonaut would have been facing. But in this case it was off to the side, and on the upper left there you can see a pre-flight photo of the 3 astronauts as they would be during the flight. This was kind of risky, to say the least, launching 3 people without any kind of an escape system, no ejection seats, no escape tower, not even any spacesuits. And of course, again, we in the West were unaware of these risks, and it was yet another Soviet space spectacular that was the first multi-person space flight in several months before Gemini could even launch 2 astronauts.
So basically a very significant flight in many ways. Again, that's Andrew Chaikin. That's part of a series of lectures he gave at Montana State University. It's a 3-part series. You can find it on YouTube. Definitely check it out. Very interesting.
Yeah.
One last thing I will say, when I was doing research on this, turns out that while Voskhod 1 was in orbit, people on the ground were actually picking up signals from the spacecraft. It was received in England and also Gainesville, Florida. Anyway, that's pretty much it.
So thank you for staying after the credits.
We're going to leave you with a song that was sent in by one of our listeners, and this is something you can also find on YouTube. Just search for the term Garbage Day. Believe it or not, there's animation that goes with it. So we'll see you again next week.